Change never begins where you think it does. We imagine it starts with a plan, a deadline, a new version of ourselves we promise to become. But in truth, change begins in the smallest, quietest recognition. The moment you stop trying to control the pace of your own becoming. Something ancient in the human mind resists forced transformation, not because we don't want to evolve, but because we equate change with danger. When you've survived through stability, your nervous system treats anything unfamiliar as threat. So the harder you push yourself to be different, the louder your body whispers, "Not safe." This is the paradox that keeps so many people stuck. The conscious mind declares, "I must change now." But the unconscious whispers, "If I change, I might disappear." Most people try to negotiate between these two voices through willpower. They make plans, impose structure, demand discipline. And while structure can guide, force only creates friction. You can't rewire your inner world through the same tension you're trying to escape. The human psyche doesn't bloom under command. It unfolds under permission. If this feels familiar, stay with me. You've probably felt it before, that invisible resistance that rises right when you're about to do something new. It feels like procrastination, or self-sabotage, or laziness. But it isn't any of those. It's protection. The mind, at its core, is not designed for growth. It's designed for survival. Every past pain becomes a data point your body uses to predict safety. If, once upon a time, trying something new led to rejection, failure, or loss, your system learned that new equals unsafe. So when you try to force change, your body launches an ancient defense. Slow down, freeze, avoid. This is why forcing change often backfires. You're not working against weakness, you're working against your own wiring. The more pressure you apply, the more resistance you activate. It's a psychological law, as predictable as gravity. What you resist resists you back. There's a gentler way, a way that works not by overpowering the resistance, but by understanding it. It begins with this realization. Resistance is not an enemy of change. It's evidence of it. The moment you try to move beyond your current self, your nervous system awakens like a guard dog sensing movement outside the gate. The barking is not the threat. It's the alarm. The real transformation begins when you stop trying to silence the alarm and start listening to what it's warning you about. Every form of resistance has a story underneath. Procrastination says, "I don't feel ready." Self-criticism says, "I'm afraid of being seen." Over-control says, "I've been hurt when I trusted before." Once you decode the message, the resistance softens because it no longer needs to scream to be heard. You're finally listening to what it's been trying to protect you from. This is the psychological law that changes everything. What you accept transforms. What you force resists. Think about how a wound heals. You don't tear it open to make it close faster. You clean it, protect it, and give it space. The body knows what to do when conditions are right. The psyche is no different. Growth is not an act of violence against who you were. It's an act of hospitality toward who you are becoming. But we live in a culture that glorifies pressure. Push through, grind, no excuses. It sells because it feels like control. Yet most control is a mask for fear. People control when they don't trust. When you don't trust your natural rhythm of change, you try to manipulate it. But true transformation, the kind that stays, happens only when you stop fighting your own tempo. Every person has an inner pace, a cadence shaped by their history, their wounds, their thresholds. Forcing yourself to move faster than that pace doesn't make you stronger. It makes you fracture. There's something quietly radical about letting yourself change slowly. In a world obsessed with immediacy, slowness feels rebellious. But slowness is how the nervous system integrates safety. When you move gently, your mind learns it's okay to shift. And once your body believes safety and change can coexist, the transformation that once felt impossible becomes inevitable. Here's what most people miss. You cannot rewire fear through force because fear is already a form of force. You can't heal tension by adding more tension to it. The real work is disarming the inner fight, the one between who you are and who you think you should be. The moment that fight ends, energy that was trapped in resistance becomes available for creation. You stop trying to escape yourself and start growing from within yourself. Notice how children learn. They don't sit down with a self-improvement plan. They play. They explore. They fail, cry, and try again. Their learning is guided not by demand, but by curiosity. Adults forget this because somewhere along the line, curiosity was replaced with performance. We began to believe we must earn our right to evolve. But growth isn't earned. It's allowed. The reason this law, acceptance transforms, force resists, works so deeply is because it aligns with the brain's fundamental design. The amygdala, the part that detects threat, doesn't differentiate between physical danger and emotional danger. If change feels unsafe, it will trigger the same alarm as a tiger in the bushes. That's why even small changes can feel overwhelming. It's not irrational. It's protective logic. The body has remembered something the mind forgot. So instead of asking, "How do I change faster?" ask, "What part of me doesn't feel safe changing yet?" That single question shifts everything. You move from confrontation to compassion. You stop being the commander of your growth and become its caretaker. Imagine trying to make a flower bloom by shouting at it. You could water it, give it sunlight, tend to the soil, but you cannot demand it to open. Growth follows cycles. There's germination, stillness, struggle, and emergence. To rush any stage is to break the integrity of the process. The same applies to you. When you stop forcing, you stop breaking. You've been conditioned to believe effort equals progress. But sometimes the most profound progress looks like stillness, like letting the dust settle after years of running, like learning to sit with what is until what is reveals its own next step. Forced change is brittle. Natural change is rooted. One collapses under pressure. The other weathers storms. The real secret is this. You don't create transformation. You create conditions for it. You create safety, understanding, and self-compassion. And transformation arises as a side effect. That's why this law works 1,000 times better than force. It doesn't fight human nature. It collaborates with it. Somewhere deep down, you've already sensed this. The exhaustion you feel after trying so hard to change, that's your body saying, "We're doing this the wrong way." The relief that comes When you finally let yourself be, that's your system, remembering how healing actually works. Change, in its truest form, isn't about becoming someone else. It's about becoming someone safe enough to be yourself. And when you reach that place, the world around you begins to rearrange. Not because you forced it, but because you aligned with it. But there's still something deeper beneath this law, a hidden mechanism that explains why acceptance transforms while force fails. It has to do with identity itself, the invisible contract between who you were and who you believe you must remain to stay loved. And once you see how that contract quietly governs your every attempt at change, everything starts to make sense. Every human carries an invisible agreement about who they must be to stay safe, loved, and accepted. This agreement forms early, before we even have words. It's the psychological contract between the self and survival, a quiet deal that says, if I stay this way, I'll stay connected. We rarely know we've signed it, but it governs everything. It determines which emotions we suppress, which dreams we chase, which patterns we repeat. It's the architecture of identity, built not from authenticity, but from adaptation. When we try to change, we aren't just breaking a habit, we're breaking that contract. And that's why it hurts. Every part of you that learned to survive by being cautious, agreeable, invisible, or strong believes change will threaten its existence. To that part, transformation feels like betrayal. It whispers, if I stop being who I've always been, who will protect me? This is the psychological knot at the center of resistance. You can't simply untie it through effort. You must understand what it's protecting. You see this pattern everywhere. The person who wants confidence but keeps shrinking back isn't weak. They're loyal. They learned that visibility once invited pain. The one who longs for love but pushes people away isn't broken. They're protecting themselves from the repetition of loss. Identity becomes armor, and that armor is intelligent. It kept you alive in moments when softness would have been unsafe. The paradox is that what once protected you now prevents you. This is why willpower alone fails. Willpower fights the symptom, not the contract. It tries to drag you into a new self without honoring the old one. But the old self doesn't vanish because you've decided to move on. It needs to be retired with reverence. You can't evolve by exiling who you were. You evolve by integrating who you were into who you're becoming. So the work of transformation becomes relational, not mechanical. You build a relationship with the parts of you that resist. You approach them not as obstacles, but as exiled protectors. When you feel yourself avoiding action, instead of scolding that avoidance, you ask, what are you afraid would happen if we actually changed? That question turns Anbasor's inner resistance into conversation. And conversation creates collaboration. Most people never realize they're living under old emotional laws. If I disappoint people, I'll lose love. If I rest, I'll fall behind. If I'm vulnerable, I'll get hurt. These are the subconscious statutes we inherited from experience. And until we question them, they rule us. But here's the truth that quietly frees you. Those laws were written for conditions that no longer exist. You are not that child anymore. The world is no longer that room. Yet your body doesn't know the difference until you show it. To stop forcing change is to begin updating those inner laws. It means you no longer demand transformation as proof of worth, but allow it as an expression of safety. When your nervous system learns that it won't be punished for shifting, it begins to open naturally. This is the deeper psychological law beneath the surface. 1. The psyche doesn't release what it still believes it needs to survive. That's why you can't bully yourself into healing. You can only make safety so undeniable that the parts of you clinging to control finally exhale. Safety is not shot. It's sacred. It's the soil where every genuine change takes root. People often confuse pressure with progress because pressure produces motion. But not all motion is movement. Sometimes you're sprinting in circles, exhausting yourself to prove you're changing, while internally, nothing has shifted. Real movement is quieter. It feels less like sprinting forward and more like a deep internal sigh, a releasing of what's been clenched for years. You can't see it at first, but over time, your life begins to rearrange around it. Think of the person who finally stops apologizing for existing, or the one who no longer over-explains their feelings. These aren't small behavioral tweaks. They're evidence of identity updating itself. They're moments when the old contract dissolves and a new one begins to write itself. I can be loved and still be real. I can rest and still be worthy. I can change and still be safe. The reason this law works 1,000 times better is not mystical, it's mechanical. When you align with safety, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the body's repair mode. Creativity, emotional regulation, learning, all happen here. Force, on the other hand, activates defense. It floods you with cortisol, tunnel visions your awareness, and makes change nearly impossible. This is why the gentlest people often heal the fastest. Their nervous system isn't fighting itself. But gentleness doesn't mean passivity. It means precision, the ability to know when to soften and when to stand firm. It's saying, I won't force myself, but I also won't abandon my growth. It's the middle path between apathy and aggression. That's the true balance of transformation. Firmness without force, softness without surrender. And this balance is emotional maturity in action. Maturity isn't suppressing emotion. It's understanding its function. Anger protects boundaries. Sadness releases attachment. Fear signals potential danger. When you stop labeling emotions as bad, you stop waging war on your own inner signals. You start to trust your own design again. That's when change accelerates. Not because you're forcing it, but because every part of you is finally rowing in the same direction. Alignment replaces friction. What once felt impossible begins to feel natural. You realize you were never lazy, unmotivated, or broken. You were simply misaligned with your own biology. Look closely at people who've truly transformed. There's a calm about them. They don't speak about change with tension. They speak about it with tenderness. They no longer chase intensity. They seek integration. Because they've learned that intensity without integration is trauma on repeat. The real miracle isn't changing overnight. It's becoming the kind of person for whom growth no longer feels like war. This is the shift the psyche has been waiting for. The moment when transformation stops feeling like punishment and starts feeling like peace. When the same energy you once used to fight yourself becomes the energy you use to understand yourself. But here's something subtle. most never see. Every genuine transformation requires a small death, the death of the identity that once kept you safe. The death isn't tragic, it's sacred. Yet it's also why we fear change so deeply. Every cell of you remembers what it means to lose something that once protected you. That fear doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. And if you can grieve who you've been without rushing to replace them, you create the most fertile ground for growth imaginable. Because grief, when honored, turns into wisdom. It teaches you to change without abandoning yourself. So the next time you find yourself forcing progress, repeating affirmations that don't land, chasing goals that exhaust you, trying to be better, pause. Ask what part of you still believes force equals safety. That's where the real transformation waits. Because behind every compulsion to control lies an unhealed fear of loss. And once you can hold that fear instead of fight it, change begins to unfold almost on its own. That's the unspoken beauty of this law. When you stop pushing, life starts participating. Circumstances align, people appear, synchronicities multiply, not because the universe suddenly favors you, but because you're no longer fighting its rhythm. You're finally moving with it. And yet, there's one more layer, the deepest one. It's not about behavior or belief, but about belonging. Beneath every attempt to change lies the same hidden question. Who will I belong to if I become different? Until you answer that question with love, the old self will always pull you back. Maybe change isn't something we do, but something that happens the moment we stop pretending we have to earn it. Maybe it's what begins when you stop managing your own becoming and start listening to the quiet intelligence underneath the noise, the one that already knows when it's time. Every ending you've resisted was only the threshold of a softer beginning. Every identity you've outgrown was a bridge, not a prison. You were never meant to stay the same. You were meant to stay honest. So perhaps the question is no longer, how do I change? Perhaps it's, how do I allow what's already changing in me to keep unfolding? There's a rhythm beneath your plans, a slow, patient pulse that's been guiding you longer than you've been aware. You feel it in moments of quiet recognition, when the pressure lifts and something inside finally says, yes, this pace feels true. Maybe that's where transformation hides, not in the grand gesture, but in the moment you choose to move at the speed of trust. And maybe the purpose of all this learning, all this shedding, is simply to remember that nothing real is ever lost when you stop forcing. Only the unnatural parts fall away. What remains is what was always waiting, the self that no longer needs to fight to exist. Listen closely. Change is already happening in you, not because you demanded it, but because you finally stopped interrupting it.